He was young, in love, and just days away from his wedding. But when family couldn't reach him, they went to his home, and what they found would silence an entire street. At first, it looked like a tragic case of violence. But the real story? It would take weeks, and 2 funerals, to begin unraveling. Because in this case, the people grieving weren't just hiding pain. They were hiding something much darker. It began like any other Tuesday. Derek Hatcher had sent a text to his cousin the night before, short, casual, about picking up the suits for the groomsmen. The wedding was just 5 days away. Everything had been running smoothly, or so it seemed. But by mid-morning, his phone was silent. Calls went unanswered. Messages left unread. The kind of silence that makes people uneasy, not panicked yet, but alert. By noon, his mother, Rhonda Marks, had already called him 4 times. No response. She tried Imani, the fiancé. No answer there either. But it was Derek she was worried about. He wasn't the type to just disappear. Not this close to the wedding. Not with a checklist still half complete. Around 2:30 p.m., she drove to his house. It was a modest 2-bedroom place on the edge of town. Quiet street. Same neighbors for years. His car was parked in the driveway. The porch light was still on from the night before. Mail sat untouched in the box. She knocked, waited, knocked again. There was no movement inside. No footsteps. No voices. Just the faint hum of the refrigerator through the door. Rhonda had a key. She always had one. Derek gave it to her when he first moved in, just in case. At the time, it felt symbolic, a small gesture of trust. Now, it felt heavier. She opened the door. Inside, the air felt thick, still. Nothing out of place at first glance, no sign of a break-in. The living room was clean, the TV remote still on the armrest. But something was off. Too still. She called his name once, then twice. Walked past the kitchen. Paused by the hallway. The smell hit her before she reached the bedroom. What happened in that house would bring detectives, forensic teams, and news vans over the next 48 hours. But in that moment, it was just a mother, calling her son's name over and over, praying she wouldn't be the one to find what she feared. The investigation began that afternoon, but no one, family, friends, or even police, could have guessed just how tangled the truth would become. Leon Hatcher wasn't just a father. He was the pastor. He'd led the same church for over 15 years. A steady voice in the pulpit. Always measured, always composed. In the community, he was known for showing up. Funerals, baby dedications, block meetings. The kind of man people called when things went wrong. The kind of man who buried other people's sons. Years earlier, he'd married Rhonda Marks, a young widow with a boy. Derek was 8 then. Quiet. Watchful. Leon stepped in, and for a long time, it looked like he did everything right. Raised the boy, taught him discipline, took him fishing, sat beside him at basketball games. They carried the same last name, but weren't blood. Still, anyone looking in would have called them family. Real family. Those who knew them best said they were close, until they weren't. In the last year, something had shifted. The 2 men still attended the same church, but rarely arrived together. Conversations were shorter, smiles more polite, and whenever someone asked Leon how wedding plans were going, he gave the same short answer. "It's their moment, not mine." No one thought much of it. Not then. Leon stayed composed after Derek's death, gave his statements to police, helped coordinate the funeral, shook hands, held prayers, showed no sign of a man unraveling. And yet, something about him didn't sit right with everyone. Not loud enough to raise alarms, just enough to make people look twice. He had always been the man everyone trusted, but now even trust was starting to feel like a mask. Imani Brooks was supposed to be choosing centerpieces. Instead, she was picking out a black dress. The wedding was meant to take place on a Saturday. Instead, she stood at the front pew just 5 days later, staring into a casket. No vows, no rings, just silence and the weight of unanswered questions. After the burial, she didn't return to her apartment. She moved into Pastor Leon Hatcher's home, quietly. No announcement, no formal explanation. But when asked, she said it was for safety, grief, guidance. Some people accepted that. Others hesitated. A few neighbors started noticing small changes. Morning routines shifted. Lights on late. 2 coffee cups instead of 1 on the porch rail. Leon, who used to run his errands early, now took longer trips and came back less predictable. Neither of them spoke much to anyone. Church members whispered, but no one confronted. She didn't smile as much anymore. She didn't cry much either. To some, she looked broken. To others, she looked like someone adjusting. Everyone had a version of what they thought she was going through. But the only version that mattered was hers, and she wasn't telling it. Not yet. Detectives started where they always do. The last 48 hours. Derek Hatcher's schedule was tight in those final days. Work, meetings, vendor calls. He was juggling final wedding arrangements with his usual responsibilities at the church, where he still volunteered despite a full-time job in logistics. By all accounts, he seemed focused, maybe a little distracted, but not unusually so. The church secretary confirmed seeing him Monday morning. He had dropped off printed programs and double-checked the wedding rehearsal date. He left just before noon. That afternoon, a neighbor, a retired teacher who lived 3 houses down, reported hearing raised voices. She didn't see anyone, but told police the yelling lasted less than 2 minutes. One voice was clearly Derek's. The other she couldn't place. She never thought to report it until the news broke. That same evening, Derek canceled a meetup with his groomsmen, a casual dinner to confirm fittings and pickup times. He sent a message saying, "Something's come up. We'll circle back later." He never did. Investigators began piecing together his movements from phone pings and CCTV footage in the area. He was seen stopping for gas just before 8 p.m. No security footage from his street showed any unusual activity after that. His phone went dark at 10:42 p.m. No calls, no texts, just silence. Detectives secured his phone the same day they processed the scene. It was found in the bedroom, powered off, charger unplugged. No obvious signs of tampering, no damage. At this stage, they hadn't unlocked it yet, but they believed it was the key. Not to what happened that night, but to who was already circling him before it did. It took a court order and 4 days for the digital forensics unit to break into Derek Hatcher's phone. The team worked from a cloned copy, standard procedure to avoid corrupting the original. Most of the content was ordinary: wedding logistics, work messages, church group chats. But tucked deeper in the message cache, flagged under recent deletions, were fragments of something else. Tension. There was a thread between Derek and Imani Brooks, one that hadn't been part of earlier backups. The tone was off. Shorter replies, repeated questions from Derek. Things like, "Why wouldn't you just say that to me?" And, "If you're not being honest, I can't walk into this." The last message from her end read simply, "You're being paranoid. This isn't what you think." He never replied. Further down, forensics recovered a second thread, initially dismissed as spam. The contact name was generic: Glenn R. No photo, no mutual connections. But the pattern was strange. Late-night messages, mostly short. No replies from Derek, just incoming messages like, "Did he say anything?" and "Don't stir it up right now." Investigators ran the number. It didn't trace back to any official phone line registered to Leon Hatcher. But when subpoenaed records from the phone provider came in, they confirmed the number belonged to a burner phone purchased 3 months earlier. With usage tied only to locations Leon was confirmed to have visited. The number stopped transmitting 2 days before the murder. That was enough to shift the scope of the investigation. Up until this point, detectives were looking outward. Now, they were looking closer to home. With digital evidence pointing inward, investigators turned next to the financials. They started with Leon Hatcher's personal bank account. The activity was mostly routine: direct deposits, recurring church-related expenses, modest withdrawals. But one transaction stood out. 4 days before Derek's death, Leon withdrew $12,000 in cash from a local branch. No check, no memo, no explanation. Just a quiet, in-person withdrawal. Surveillance confirmed it was Leon at the counter. He was alone, calm. When asked, the bank manager said it wasn't his usual pattern. Leon rarely handled cash. Detectives flagged the transaction. Then came a second detail: a deposit into Imani Brooks's personal account. $9,800, deposited the morning after Derek's body was found. The deposit was made through an ATM, with no note attached. No one on record could explain the origin of the funds. Imani didn't report receiving any large sum during her interview. She never mentioned it at all. From a legal standpoint, neither transaction broke any laws. But, when examined together, they raised a larger question. Why? And why then? Investigators dug further and found something else: a life insurance policy, taken out the previous year in Derek's name. The policy was modest, just under $100,000, standard through his employer. But the beneficiary listed wasn't Rhonda Marks, his mother. It was Imani Brooks. There was no indication Derek had ever tried to change it. But the timing, paired with the other activity, was impossible to ignore. Detectives believe Leon Hatcher entered the house sometime between 9 p.m. and 10:30 p.m. He may have used a spare key, or Derek may have let him in himself. There were no signs of struggle in the living room or kitchen. But in the hallway, investigators noted scuff marks on the baseboard. Fresh ones. And a deep bruise found on Derek's temple suggested a physical altercation, likely sudden. They believe the two men argued. The assumption is this: Leon confronted Derek about the wedding, or more likely, about something Derek had discovered, possibly the relationship with Imani, or the financial moves happening behind his back. At some point, the confrontation turned physical. Forensics noted that Derek had a defensive wound on his left forearm, consistent with raising his arm to block a blow. The coroner ruled the fatal injury was blunt force trauma to the back of the skull, consistent with being shoved or slammed into a hard surface. Detectives believe Derek may have fallen backwards, hitting his head on the corner of a cabinet. No blood spatter was found on the walls, but a small pool had dried beneath his body. There was no weapon recovered, but the injuries suggested the killing wasn't premeditated with a weapon, but spontaneous, using physical force. By the next morning, Imani Brooks had already stopped responding to messages from family and friends. She was seen that evening entering Leon's house. She would never return to Derek's apartment. Within 48 hours, the $9,800 deposit landed in her account. Investigators believe this was either payment, insurance, or panic. But what stands out most to detectives is what wasn't done. No emergency call. No anonymous tip. No effort to distance from the scene. Detectives never used the word conspiracy in the official file. But privately, some believe the timeline and financial movements suggest Leon and Imani were involved long before Derek's death. Possibly emotionally, maybe financially. And the confrontation that Monday night was the moment Derek stepped into a truth he wasn't meant to survive. By the time investigators had gathered enough evidence to move on an arrest, the case had taken a turn no one expected. They were ready, warrants prepped, statements lined up. But Leon Hatcher never saw the inside of a courtroom. Exactly 7 days after Imani Brooks moved into his home, Leon collapsed in his kitchen. It was early morning. A neighbor reported seeing the ambulance, but assumed it was a routine call. It wasn't. Paramedics found him unresponsive. He was pronounced dead at the scene. Natural causes, the medical examiner said. A heart attack, no visible injuries, no struggle, no signs of poisoning, no drugs in his system. Just a sudden, quiet end. He died before investigators could confront him with what they'd uncovered, before questions could be asked, before he could give his side of the story, if he had one. Now, there were 2 funerals in 2 weeks. 2 men, both connected by blood, and by Imani. And with Leon gone, the focus shifted. Not just to what happened to Derek Hatcher, but to what Imani Brooks was doing in the middle of it all. There would be no trial, no cross-examination, no courtroom answers. With Leon Hatcher gone, and Derek Hatcher buried before him, the investigation hit a wall. Detectives had timelines, financial trails, messages. But what they didn't have was a living suspect to face the questions. Imani Brooks was never arrested. She wasn't charged. Police spoke with her once, but she declined to answer most of their questions. The case was never officially closed, but it hasn't moved forward either. Some within the department saw it as a crime of passion, rage masked as control. Others believed it was something colder, a long-played setup with too many moving parts, and now no one left to explain them. The evidence remains sealed, the files still marked open. But no one expects a resolution. One detective, now retired, said it best. You can't question a man in a grave. But the silence left behind? That's where the answers live.